If we no longer care about a feeling, as for example, Charlie, I think there are a lot of things he doesn't care about anymore.
Sidney Lumet's name stands as one of the great pillars of American cinema. While some directors chased spectacle or indulged in stylistic excess, Lumet remained focused on human beings, on how they acted under pressure, how they wrestled with guilt, and how they made choices that revealed their true selves. Over a career spanning 5 decades, he directed more than 40 films, many of which are now considered timeless classics. 12 Angry Men, Dog Day Afternoon, Network, The Verdict, The Pawnbroker, Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. Each film grappled with weighty themes: justice, corruption, morality, survival, and each was anchored by performances of staggering intensity. What made Lumet unique wasn't just his eye for framing or his disciplined approach to storytelling, it was his gift for working with actors. He believed in rehearsal, in stripping away artifice, in digging deep into a script until the performance became raw, honest, and undeniable. Lumet once said, "All good work requires self-revelation." And for him, the best actors were those willing to put their souls on the line, to let the camera capture their vulnerabilities and contradictions. This countdown looks at 7 actors who defined Sidney Lumet's cinema. These weren't just stars reading lines, they were artists wrestling with the very themes that haunted Lumet himself. Each entry highlights a single, unforgettable scene, paired with the exact words that echo decades later. From Rod Steiger's searing embodiment of Holocaust trauma in The Pawnbroker, to Faye Dunaway's icy cynicism in Network, to Henry Fonda's quiet but unshakable moral authority in 12 Angry Men, Lumet chose performers who could handle the weight of his stories. They weren't flashy for the sake of flash. They weren't heroic in the Hollywood sense. They were flawed, complex, deeply human. So let's step into Sidney Lumet's world. The courtroom battles, the newsroom breakdowns, the bank heists gone wrong, and count down the 7 actors who, through their craft, carried his vision onto the screen. We'll begin at number 7 and work our way to the performance that Lumet himself often cited as the cornerstone of his career. Number 7, Rod Steiger in The Pawnbroker, 1964.
To gaze at a limitless land and call it your own, no. You just go on and on and on, repeating this process over the centuries.
Sidney Lumet's The Pawnbroker is often remembered as the first American film to confront Holocaust trauma with such raw, unflinching honesty. At the center of it is Rod Steiger, playing Sol Nazerman, a Jewish pawnbroker living in Harlem who survived the camps but carries his scars in silence. Lumet needed an actor who could embody decades of pain, someone whose very presence communicated grief that could never be healed. He found that in Steiger. In one of the film's most searing moments, Sol launches into a bitter monologue to his assistant, explaining why he is the way he is.
You start off with a period of several thousand years. No land to call your own. All you have is a little brain. With this little brain, you go out and you buy a piece of cloth, and you cut that cloth in two, and you go out and sell it for a penny more than you paid for it. You have a mercantile heritage. You're known as a use, a pawnbroker, a sheeny, a mucky, and a kite.
It's not just a rant. It's an indictment, an outpouring of self-loathing and historical bitterness that Steiger delivers with shaking intensity. His face, his voice, even the way his body seems to fold in on itself communicates a man consumed by memory and disgust. Lumet, who always believed in rehearsal, had Steiger work through Sol's psychology over and over before filming. The result was a performance so layered that critics at the time compared it to theater's greatest tragic roles. Sol is simultaneously repellent and heartbreaking, a man hardened into cruelty yet still, somewhere deep inside, vulnerable. What made Steiger perfect for Lumet was his refusal to soften the character. Hollywood in the 1960s often wanted tidy redemption arcs, but Lumet didn't believe in that. He believed in truth. And the truth was that survivors often lived with unbearable guilt and anger, unable to connect with the world around them. Steiger didn't play Sol as a symbol or victim, he played him as a man. Lumet later said that Steiger's performance changed how American audiences understood Holocaust survivors. For many viewers, it was the first time they saw the psychological toll rendered in such vivid, unromantic detail. Steiger turned Sol Nazerman into one of the most haunting characters in cinema, a man alive but trapped forever in the ruins of memory. At the heart of that satire stands Faye Dunaway as Diana Christensen, a ruthless TV executive who views news not as journalism, but as entertainment. Lumet once said that he cast Dunaway because she could play ice and fire at the same time. In networking journalism, she thinks she's doing her job brilliantly. Lumet's direction let Dunaway sharpen every edge of the character. He encouraged her to strip away any trace of warmth. Even in her personal life, like her affair with William Holden's character, Max Schumacher, she can only talk about work. Love, sex, intimacy, they're all filtered through rative and horrifying. A woman so consumed by ambition that she no longer recognized human connection. What Lumet admired most about Dunaway was her commitment to truth. He didn't want a cartoon villain. He wanted a believable executive, someone who could walk into a boardroom today and feel, turning madness into ratings and morality into a footnote. Number 5, Philip Seymour Hoffman in Before the Devil Knows You're Dead.
You won't let me?
No, no more. You either kill her or you're gonna have to kill me.
Not such a bad idea.
By the time Sidney Lumet directed Before the Devil Knows You're Dead in 2007, he was nearly 50 years into his career. Many assumed the filmmaker of 12 Angry Men and Dog Day Afternoon had already said everything he needed to. But with this late career crime drama, Lumet proved he was still capable of directing with the urgency of a newcomer, and Philip Seymour Hoffman became his perfect vessel. Hoffman plays Andy Hansen, a Manhattan broker whose life is quietly unraveling. He's outwardly successful, tailored suits, a luxury apartment, but inside he is hollowed out by debt, addiction, and despair. Lumet's camera doesn't soften him, and Hoffman doesn't beg for sympathy. Instead, he strips himself bare, showing us a man who has reached the edge. One of the film's most haunting scenes is Andy's confession.
The thing about real estate accounting is you can head down the page or across the page and everything works out. But my life, it doesn't add up. Nothing connects to anything else. I'm not the sum of my parts.
The words are simple, almost clinical, but Hoffman's delivery makes them devastating. He looks like a man who's just discovered there is no center, no core holding him together. It's a moment of existential despair, and under Lumet's direction, it hits with the weight of Greek tragedy. Lumet had always been fascinated by corruption and collapse, whether it was personal, institutional, or political. With Hoffman, he found an actor who could embody that theme not with shouting or theatrics, but with weary honesty. Hoffman doesn't play Andy as a villain or a victim. He plays him as a man trapped in a moral quicksand of his own making. Critics hailed the performance as one of Hoffman's finest, and many noted how seamlessly it fit into Lumet's career-long exploration of guilt and consequence. What's striking is how Lumet, even in his 80s, guided Hoffman with the same raw energy he once gave to Pacino or Fonda. He knew that a story about crime only matters if we believe in the human frailty at its core. Hoffman's performance is a reminder of Lumet's genius. He never needed spectacle to tell the truth. He just needed the right actor. And with Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, he found one of the best of his generation. Number 4, Paul Newman in The Verdict, 1982. Sidney Lumet had always been drawn to stories where justice feels precarious, where the courtroom isn't just a stage for lawyers, but a battleground for morality. The Verdict was one of his purest examples. Released in 1982, it gave Paul Newman one of the most profound roles of his later career, and Lumet one of his most enduring films. Newman plays Frank Galvin, a washed-up Boston attorney whose best days are far behind him. He's a drunk scraping by on ambulance-chasing cases, and everyone sees him as a lost cause. Then he stumbles into a medical malpractice case that could change everything, not just for his clients, but for his own battered sense of purpose. At the heart of the film is Galvin's closing argument to the jury. Newman delivers Lumet's words with a fragile, almost trembling honesty.
And we doubt the law. But today you are the law. You are the law.
It's not the speech of a polished trial lawyer. It's the plea of a broken man who has finally remembered why justice matters. Lumet stages the moment with quiet intensity. No sweeping music, no grand theatrics. Just Newman's voice, carrying the weight of every compromise Galvin has made in his life, now redeemed by a single act of courage. For Lumet, who spent his career questioning systems of power, this was a quintessential scene. The courtroom wasn't just a place to decide guilt or innocence. It was a place where one person's conviction could hold a mirror up to an entire society. Newman later admitted that the verdict was one of his proudest performances, and critics agreed. He was nominated for an Academy Award, and while he didn't win that year, the film cemented his reputation as an actor who could convey moral depth without sentimentality. Lumet himself praised Newman's ability to embody moral courage without ever tipping into melodrama. The collaboration showed the trust between actor and director. Lumet gave Newman space, stripping the scene of everything except the essential human struggle. Newman, in turn, brought a lifetime of experience to a role that demanded vulnerability and resilience. In The Verdict, Lumet and Newman created a portrait of redemption that still resonates decades later. It remains one of the finest examples of how an actor, under the right director, can transform a courtroom drama into something timeless. Number 3. Peter Finch in Network, 1976. If there's one performance in Sidney Lumet's career that became a cultural earthquake, it belongs to Peter Finch in Network. Released in 1976, the film was Lumet's scathing satire of televised breakdown. Lumet, always fascinated by how institutions weaponize human vulnerability, transforms Beale's outburst into a mirror for society itself. The moment that defines both the character, you've got to get up now and go to the window. Open it, stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore." Lumet films the scene not as a rant, but as a fevered sermon. The rain pours down outside. The camera lingers on Finch's sweat-soaked face, his wild eyes, and the almost religious intensity of his voice. The absurdity is undeniable, but so is the power. Actor after death. Lumet often reflected that Finch's portrayal was both larger than life and heartbreakingly human, capturing the chaos of an age when television was becoming a new kind of religion. Decades later, Beale's words remain etched into popular culture. Politicians, comedians, and everyday people still quote, "I'm as mad as hell," when frustration boils over. And play a character. He gave voice to a generation's anger. With Network, Sidney Lumet proved again that cinema could hold up a mirror to society. And with Peter Finch, he created one of the most unforgettable prophets in film history. Number 2, Al Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon, 1975. Sidney Lumet always said that the best actors weren't afraid to live in chaos, and perhaps no performance captures that better than Al Pacino's in Dog Day Afternoon. Released in 1975, the film was based on a real-life bank robbery gone wrong, and under Lumet's direction, Pacino turned what could have been a straightforward crime thriller into a desperate, electrifying portrait of human vulnerability. Pacino plays Sonny Wartzik, a man who storms into a Brooklyn bank with his partner, hoping for a quick score. Instead, the robbery collapses into a media circus. As the police close in, Sonny finds himself trapped, not just physically inside the bank, but emotionally inside his own failures. Lumet builds the tension almost like a stage play, locking the characters in the pressure cooker of a single location and letting the performances ignite. The defining moment comes when Sonny, faced with rows of armed cops and a crowd of onlookers, transforms his fear into defiance. He screams at the officers.
He wants to kill me so bad he can taste it. I'm always going to kill you.
That cry, referencing the infamous 1971 prison uprising where inmates were massacred by state police, struck like lightning in the cultural consciousness. Pacino's delivery is half fury, half plea, and all desperation. In that instant, Sonny is no longer just a criminal. He becomes a symbol of rebellion against corrupt authority. Lumet gives Pacino the space to embody not just a man cornered by circumstance, but a voice for everyone who feels brutalized by the system. The brilliance of Pacino's performance lies in its volatility. He oscillates between nervous tenderness with the hostages, frantic bargaining with police negotiators, and explosive political theater outside the bank, Lumet encouraged him to play on instinct, letting each emotional shift feel raw and unpredictable. The result is one of the most human portrayals of a criminal ever filmed, an outlaw who is flawed, frightened, yet strangely heroic. Pacino's work in Dog Day Afternoon earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, and many critics consider it the peak of his 1970s career. Lumet often reflected on how Pacino's Sonny captured the essence of the decade: distrust of government, disillusionment with authority, and the desperate search for dignity in a collapsing world. Nearly 50 years later, the chant of Attica still resonates. It is not just a line of dialogue. It is a cry against oppression, immortalized by Pacino's voice and Lumet's camera. Together, they turned a failed robbery into one of cinema's greatest indictments of power. Number 1. Henry Fonda in 12 Angry Men, 1957. For Sidney Lumet, no performance captured his vision of moral cinema more completely than Henry Fonda's turn in 12 Angry Men. It was Lumet's very first feature film, and it remains one of the most celebrated courtroom dramas ever made, not because of flashy action or spectacle, but because of the quiet power of dialogue and principle. Fonda plays juror number 8, the lone dissenter in a jury room where 11 men are ready to send a young defendant to the electric chair. At first, he doesn't claim the boy is innocent. Instead, he insists only on a simple truth: the law requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. His insistence on slowing down, on thinking, on considering the flaws in the prosecution's case, becomes the moral heartbeat of the film. The defining moment comes when he calmly reminds the others,
Nobody has to prove otherwise. The burden of proof's on the prosecution. The defendant doesn't even have to open his mouth.
It is not shouted or dramatized. It is spoken with Fonda's trademark steadiness, the quiet confidence of a man who knows that justice depends on vigilance. Lumet used every tool of his direction to amplify that sense of moral pressure. He began filming with wide open angles, and as the deliberations dragged on, he gradually shifted to tighter close-ups, lowering the camera and squeezing the walls. By the time Fonda delivers his most important arguments, the audience feels the claustrophobia of the jury room, the sweat of doubt, and the grinding moral weight of the decision. What makes Fonda's performance extraordinary is not bravado, but restraint. Surrounded by actors delivering anger, prejudice, and frustration, he embodies calm persistence. He listens, he questions, he insists on fairness, even when it makes him unpopular. Lumet often said that Fonda gave the film its spine, that without his presence, the drama would collapse. Fonda's work in 12 Angry Men set the tone for Lumet's career. It announced that this was a director who would explore justice, morality, and power not through car chases or spectacle, but through human confrontation. It also demonstrated the kind of actor Lumet cherished, one who could project inner conviction with absolute clarity. The film earned critical acclaim and an enduring place in American culture. Decades later, law professors still show 12 Angry Men in classrooms, activists quote its dialogue, and audiences continue to marvel at its simplicity. For Lumet, Henry Fonda was not just an actor, he was the embodiment of conscience on film. Sidney Lumet's career was never about spectacle, it was about truth, hard, uncomfortable truth. His favorite actors weren't chosen for star power alone, but for their ability to carry that truth on their shoulders, to breathe life into dialogue that struck at the core of morality, justice, and human weakness. Think of Rod Steiger's haunted bitterness in The Pawnbroker. Faye Newman gave voice to faith and justice when all seemed lost. Peter Finch gave America a rallying cry of outrage. And Al Pacino gave a street protester's raw fury to a bank standoff. And towering over all of them, Henry Fonda in 12 Angry Men, a performance that crystallized Lumet's belief in individual moral responsibility. What unites these actors is not just their talent, but their willingness to be vulnerable, to expose contradictions, and to make the audience confront difficult truths. Lumet's films endure because his actors refused to give easy answers. They held up mirrors to society and forced us to look. Even now, decades later, these performances feel urgent. They remind us that the fight for justice, truth, and humanity is ongoing. They remind us that cinema, at its best, is not just entertainment, but a moral exercise, a way to examine who we are and who we want to be. So the next time you revisit a Sidney Lumet film, watch not only the story, but the faces, the silences, the dialogue delivered with unflinching honesty. That's where his legacy lives.